All
Hello.
right. Hello, hello. So just to go ahead and hop on, my name is Angela.
I'm
Um,
Drake.
and I'm so very excited for us to have this conversation about education and how it impacts generational trauma. Uh, so can you go ahead and give us just a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a little bit of background. My family growing up, they've owned childcare centers since before I was even born. So over 31 years, right? And I grew up kind of seeing the ins and outs of that, started working in childcare. And it really became something that was not necessarily like a passion for me at first. It was just something I was good at, you know? Um, and I ended up in a bunch of education companies. I ended up working for a really big company called Education First, and consulting with a lot of schools, a lot of childcare centers, um, early learning coalitions, things like that. And because I happen to be really good at working with children and explaining things in a way where people can understand, right? And I found I didn't develop this entirely myself, but I found an approach that makes it so that children can learn super quickly and learn without that frustration of like, what the heck is going on? So what's really cool about that is then children can really understand you. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. Um, I grew up, and I know we talked about this, earlier, but I grew up with a single mom. And so I came from an environment that was not the best environment. And don't get me wrong, my mom really did her best. Like I don't blame, I don't fault her. She was doing the best with the resources that she had at that time, but it was a challenge. It was very tough. And there are some things that, I wish would have been different, you know? And so I can really resonate with those who are in your group. I'm one of them. I'm one of these parents who's like, I got to parent myself, reparent myself, right? But one thing that I know was extremely hard was I saw you posted the other day about growing up in poverty, right? If you grew up with
Hmm.
poverty, does that affect you? Does that give you any sort of trauma? And I would say yes.
Right.
Even after you've um, made more money, there it may change the conditions, the situations, but the habits that are ingrained in you are still there,
Hmm.
and it can last for generations.
Yeah.
And that's something that I personally experienced, and as well as being raised by a single mother, raising a boy. It is there's a particular challenge there because, well, I mean, at a certain point, I know what was going on in the back of my mom's head because we were talking about it. Is that at one point my son's going to be bigger than me? He
Yep.
may not listen, so I got to get the discipline in now while I can. And that's just an unfortunate way to think about raising a child. And I know she's not the only one. I know she's not the only one who thinks that way or who thought that way. And I know that many parents, male or female, think that way as well. And it's because she was afraid that I wouldn't listen to her or understand her. And that's the really critical thing that I want to kind of share if your audience
Yeah.
wants to hear it. But I want to share about um, helping a child to understand, because then you don't have to do all those sort of things that we didn't like done to us when we were kids, right? And so
100%.
yeah, I'll I'll give it back to you, but just let me
So,
know where you want to go
yeah,
from. Yeah,
it sounds like you've had a lot of discipline growing up,
yeah,
uh, because that's, how your mother was trying to cope with and figure out how to raise a child while being single and not really having as much help and resources available to her.
right.
Uh, so, one of the big questions that I have for you: how do you want this to differ in your life, in your parenting? And, you know, I know you're in a wonderful relationship with, you know, your wife, and that's gorgeous. And I hope that that lasts for many, many years. But let us pretend for 2 seconds that, you were a single father with your daughter. Like, how do you think that you would be able to cope and not do the same things that your mom did? What would be
Ooh.
the things that you would want to make sure you did differently?
Oh, that's a challenging question. I like it that it's a challenge because, I'm not in that situation, right?
No.
And I worked very hard to not be in that situation because I did believe that that would be the situation that I would end up in, right?
Yeah.
I growing up, everyone in my family was a single parent, essentially. At some point, whether they were married or not, they ended up becoming a single parent. And that was the example that I saw all around me. And I started to believe that that would be what I would live as well. And I was like, really, I had to do a lot of work before getting here to get to the point where I have this, like you said, really loving, amazing relationship. I love my wife. She's amazing. And so, but if seeing I do work with a lot of single mothers. I do work with a lot of single
Yeah.
parents. And so the advice that I give to them is, uh, man, actually, can I give you a little bit more context for this?
Yeah,
Right?
please do.
Okay. Because what I see a lot is from the perspective of a child doesn't really understand why you might be saying something, right? And a child's not really going to listen to you very much unless they understand, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they may listen with like punishment, they'll obey, right? But
Hmm.
that's different. That's a little bit different. Or you might have a child who's just willing to listen to you, and if so, you're lucky, right? But I think at the end of the day, a lot of parents, you don't want your child just to obey authority, right? Because
Yeah.
um, I, I think you could agree. There's like, some folks who are happy about, previous presidents or current presidents, and other folks who feel the exact opposite, right? Just within the last, two
Always.
administrations, right? And so that means that, okay, there's somebody in a position of authority that you disagree with, right?
Hmm.
Regardless of which side you're on, there's somebody in a position of authority that you disagree with, which means you have to be able to have discernment and say, I'm not going along with this authority. But that happens as you're raised up, right? And so if you're not raised in a way where you can challenge the authority in your life, meaning your parents, right? Where you just have to listen to them, then that's going to create a child who grows up and, you know, I'm sure we've all heard the stories of like people who have bosses who they hate, but they have to deal with that boss and just listen to them, and they feel like there's nothing that they can do. They can't stand up for themselves. They can't stand up for their boundaries, right? Which I love
Hmm.
that. I always love your background, that image. It's like you draw beautiful boundaries. It's important, right? But
It
if a
is.
child is not able to challenge their loving parent to learn how to stand up for their boundaries, then that creates these conditions where, like the conditions I was talking about earlier with my mom, where I just had to obey. I just had to
Right.
listen. And so that's one of the things that I share with parents is um, being able to allow your child to challenge you, right? That's something that is important. But before you can even get there, you have to be able to understand that it's not like a personal affront to you, right? And,
Yeah.
and that's I think the very challenging part for a lot of parents that I talk with. Yeah.
Oh, that is, thank you so much for your answer. It's very rich. And again, hey, with as much as you talk about your wife and as much as you love her, we all love her too.
I'll let
um,
her know.
please do. She's awesome.
Wife, these strangers on the internet love you.
Um, so one of the biggest things about generational trauma is, what is the biggest difference in how you want your daughter to grow up, in the values that you want your daughter to believe in uh, as she's growing up?
Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned just earlier, I want her to be able to challenge authority. I want
Yeah.
her to be able to question things. I want her to be able to have basically critical thinking for herself, right? And I think that's really important because I don't want her to just. I look out on the world and I'm like, man, we could use a lot of changes, right? But if you're the kind of person who just kind of goes with the flow, then you're not willing to challenge those things. You may feel within yourself things need to be changed. I want things to change, but it would be very hard to actually implement that change if you've been taught on an internal level, in a very deep level, to just obey, right?
Mm.
And I was just reading something the other day, and I don't even remember where I read this, but I was reading something the other day that was talking about how you'll experience cognitive dissonance, right? Because within you is saying you have to listen to authority, otherwise you get in trouble. And so even when you're having the thought of, I don't want to listen to that because I know it's wrong, within you is like, yeah, but you're going to get in trouble if you don't listen. And you're like, that doesn't make sense. But it speaks louder than our logic because within us
Mm.
it feels like an internal fear or drive that says, hey, this could be hurtful. This is a survival mechanism that we have going on, and so our logic is telling us, no, don't listen to that. But within us we have the survival mechanism saying, yeah, just listen, just listen, it's fine, right? And I don't want my daughter to grow up with that. I don't want, any of my children to grow up with that. We're planning on having more, right? But I want them to be able to, ideally, I don't want any of my children to have the experience where they feel like you messed me up and I have to correct your mistakes to get to a place of normal or to get to the things that I want to create, to be able to just say, yeah, I want to go for it and try it. And because within that, that'll be a struggle within itself. There's a challenge within that
Right.
in itself, right? I don't want to pile on to that and say, well, before you can even get to that challenge, you got to work through all the things that I put you through, right? So that I think would be the biggest change. And again, I don't want to blame my mom at all, because I totally understand the situation. She grew up in a very similar situation, but even more challenging than I grew up, right? And
Right.
so it is this generational cycle. So I love that you put this group together because um, it is a generational thing. And at the same time, your education goes hand in hand with um, how you're able to break through these generational cycles, right? And, as an example of that, if your child can understand you, like, don't you think if you're telling your child to do something, but they understand all the things that you understand, right? Wouldn't they more willingly say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I'll do that, right?
Right.
Versus they have no idea why you're telling them to do this. It's like you're just barking commands at them and they're like, no, 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 right?
And it's okay. It's beautiful though, that last piece that you said, that they have the ability to say, no, 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 no. Like you're barking commands at me and I don't know why. Like,
Right.
uh, so I love that you reiterated that. Uh, Big question here for you. Knowing that you did go through all of that trauma and you are reparenting yourself, how did you break through to be able to chase the dreams that you are with within education, um, so that you created success outside of those, let me just stay and color in the lines?
Man, it took a lot of self-reflection and just like repeatedly over and over and over. And I also had to push through like cognitive dissonance and expand my way of thinking as well, right? And by expand my way of thinking, I simply just mean um, being able to look at something in a different light, being able to understand something differently, being willing to learn, being willing to sit there and go, okay, what you're saying does not make sense, I can see that there is some result that you're getting that maybe I want to get, or I see where you're going with this, but I can't understand it. I can't comprehend it. Where is my thinking flawed, essentially? And that takes a lot of, uh, I guess, a lot of awareness would be the word, right? A lot of awareness to be able to do that.
Right.
However, it can be learned. Awareness is not something that you're just like, you either have it or you don't. Awareness is something that you can learn, because it's sort of like, uh, how can I explain this? It's sort of like you become aware of the things in your immediate environment, and then you, you kind of internalize that. It's like driving. That's what it's like. It's like driving, right? You drive to a place. When you're first learning to drive, all you're aware of is like the car in front of you, the things that are inside your car, the noise that's happening in your car. You're like, everybody, shh, shh, I'm trying to park, right? And that's all you can really focus on. But then once you've got that down, then you can go, okay, we can turn up the radio, we can play some music. You're talking to your friend, you're talking on the, you know how many people I see now texting while they drive because it's second nature now. So now they're like, I'm so aware of how to drive, I can pay attention to other things now. I can bring other things into my awareness, right? And that's really kind of the progression of, okay, I became aware that I didn't like the way I was responding to things. That's what I became aware
Mm.
of first. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, and it was just simple things, nothing to do with parenting, even more so
Yeah.
on like what I want to accomplish, approaching this person to have a conversation, maybe make a friend, maybe make a relationship, that sort of thing. And I found myself stuck and wondering, why can't I do that? Why can't I just do this really simple thing that I really want to? Why am I so afraid? And then the self-reflection comes in, and then becoming aware of like, oh, okay, so this is what's going on within me, and then attempting to change that over and over and over, right? um i, I have a question. I have a question for
Yep.
who's listening. Right. um do you think, and I know, well, I know some people get this wrong, right, but we'll see. Do you think as a parent or as an adult that you're supposed to know everything?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right. But what would you say?
For me, the more that I grow, the more that I know that I don't know.
Exactly. Right. Okay. See, all right. That was the easy one. Now the harder one. Do you have to be punished in order to learn? Because we're always supposed to be learning, right? And
Yeah.
you're growing and learning, right? Do you have to be punished to learn in order to learn?
There tends to be some natural consequences.
Right.
Like, I don't need anything outside of those natural consequences to push me forward, though.
There you go. There you go. Right. And so that's the one thing I think that it's for some people it's iffy. It's an iffy question. Do I have to be punished in order to learn?
Yeah.
Because someone might say, well, I mean, if you don't pay your taxes, the tax season's right now. It's the deadline is now. If you haven't filed your taxes, I'm sorry. Maybe it's too soon, right? But um, if you haven't filed your taxes, the IRS slaps you with a fee, or maybe if it's really bad, jail time, right? And
Yeah.
so you could say that's a punishment, right? But think about it from your own perspective. If you say the wrong thing to your child, should you get a spanking or be put in timeout? Or, if you said the wrong thing at work, should your boss pull you
Ooh.
aside into his office and yell at you? Or should he say, you know what, go sit in the corner, think about what you did, and for the next 3 days, no paycheck until you get your act together, right? Uh, Would you agree that
Yep.
would be like a little bit insane?
Absolutely. I wouldn't, like, I would leave.
Yeah, okay, okay. So, but if you break the law, you go to jail, right? That's a
Yeah.
punishment. Okay. But why is that the case? It's because of go
Because
ahead,
our
good.
government like that's a whole thing about our government being set up in the same way that we have all those old school parenting techniques that not are proven not to work as well.
You hit it right on the head, right on the head. Like, and some of the crimes that are done within our system, it's kind of built into the system. Like, if you don't
Hmm.
have enough, wouldn't it just make sense to steal? Like, if you are going to provide for your family, right? Your family needs to eat.
Yeah.
You don't have anything available to you, but there's bread right there. You don't have any resources to get the bread, but you could just take it and feed your family. Are you going to let your family starve, or are you going to take the bread and deal with the consequences?
You're gonna do what you need to do.
Exactly, exactly. And so, but like you said, the government does not believe that they can give you, as a citizen, the
Hmm.
understanding. So instead, they have to punish. They don't know how to give you the understanding. And here's the critical piece here, right? We are we've all been through these government schools where they don't know how to give you understanding, right?
Yeah.
Right now, if you look it up right now, 2/3 of kids across the nation can't read, right?
Oh,
They can't read at their grade level. 2/3. 40% is they can't even read at a basic level. The rest is like the other 20% is like, well, we can at least read at the basic level, but we're not reading at the level we're supposed to be reading at, right? Um, Here's another good one. How many people do you meet that say, I don't like fractions, right?
I haven't asked very many people.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I talk to parents all the time. Parents all the time. They say, I don't like fractions. I hate fractions.
I would
Okay.
be one.
Okay. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's
They made it complicated.
they did. They did. And the government is admitting we don't know how to give you understanding. We can only give you punishments and rewards, right? And that's like you said, the same thing. It's happening in our schools, it's happening from our parents, and we get motivated. That's why we are still a society that's motivated by punishment and reward, because
Mhm.
we get it at home, we get it at school. Like what is an F? That's a punishment, right? And an A
Yep.
is a reward. Yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a
No,
tangent.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So I assume though that you when you talk about all of this, you talk about it that with some solutions in mind.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And I'm assuming you're bringing that up because you want me to share some solutions here.
Absolutely.
You got it. You got it. So let me just kind of lay out some consequences and then I'll give the solution. Because when you live in punishment and reward, you're in competition mode,
Hmm.
right? You're in like get mode. You're
Mm,
in selfish, look out for myself mode. You're in survival mode, really. Because if I don't get, then I get punished. Or if
right.
I can get by, then that's good. So I need to get by. I need to seek the next reward. But what suffers at that hand is creativity. What suffers is caring. What suffers is a love of learning. What suffers is compassion and empathy, right? And so if you want your child to have all those things, then you have to move out of the punishment and reward and into the understanding, right? Like a client of mine, her daughter was like 3 turning 4. And one night she said to her mom, she said, Mommy, you're a good mommy. And and
Oh.
this client, she's like, probably like you and me, like, that's cool. Why are you saying that? Like, where's that coming from? Right. And her daughter told her, You're a good mommy because you teach me things. I learn from you. And it was just so cool because the daughter's recognizing, like, oh, I'm learning. I actually can understand what you're saying. You're not just telling me what to do, right? There's a reason behind it that I can understand. You're breaking it down for me, right? And so the solution then is this. Um, if let me lay out this one last point. One last point.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So can you imagine your child being able to understand 5 years in advance, right? Meaning, let me say that a little bit differently, a little less clunky, right? If you can imagine your child skipping ahead 5 years in their understanding and their ability to grasp what you're saying, right? What would that look like? Would things be different, right? Would the relationship between your child be different, between yourself and your child? Would the way they do things throughout the house be different? Maybe they're like, oh no, I get this. I need to pick this up and put it in here, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, then okay, that way you wouldn't have to yell as much. You wouldn't have to do the punishments. You wouldn't have to do the timeouts, right? And also, if you can imagine, what would your life have looked like, your childhood, if your parents didn't fear that you wouldn't understand what they're saying or that you wouldn't listen? And if they didn't punish you, and if you could understand, would you have grown up differently? Would things be different, right? And I know for myself, that would be a resounding yes, 100%, right?
I think for 100% of my
Okay.
audience,
Okay.
like the audience that we're talking to,
Then I'm talking
completely.
to the right crowd. I'm talking to the right crowd. But what that creates is more self-confidence, less insecurity, less fear,
Mhm.
more enjoyment, right? More appreciation with your parents, for your parents, right? And if you're serious about making that happen for your kids, then here's like a first step here. And the first step is you have to find the understanding for yourself first before you can give that understanding to your child.
Mm,
If you're expecting them to understand when you don't clearly understand first, then you got it the wrong way around. It's in reverse, right? So what that looks like though is whenever you're in a moment where you can feel that emotion bubbling up within you, whether that emotion is like frustration, whether it's fear or anxiety, or it's anger, or whatever the case may be, you're sitting there with your child and they start making a run for the street, right? And you
mm,
feel that anxiety, right? And you shout and yell. Okay, that's important at that moment. You need to stop them from going out in the street, right?
right.
But also um, become aware of what is the emotion that you're feeling there. And probably it'd be better to do this after that moment has passed, right? Make sure they're safe first, right?
Yeah.
But after that moment has passed. Or another example is your child is drawing on the wall. I know I did this as a child.
Mm.
I
My
did,
chil my children have done this.
okay, okay. There's a video that my mom has of me with lipstick in my hand, all over my face, on the wall, and I am just drawing away. And
And I'm
yeah,
guessing you thought it was a beautiful masterpiece at the time.
I have no idea what was going through my mind, but I know I was drawing. I had a smile on my face. But okay, how would the average person respond, the average parent respond to that? Is in that moment, they'll probably feel like this, oh my goodness, this anxiety, this anger, maybe. In that moment, here's what I suggest as a first step is take a breath and then say this phrase. And if you can say it out loud, it's good, right? But even if you just say it in your head, I forgive myself for accepting and allowing myself to parent from the example of my parents.
Mm.
Right.
Ooh, can you go ahead and repeat that real quick though? Because I think they're all going to need to hear this again.
Yes, yes. So maybe write this down for yourself as well, right? But or pause this, rewind it, listen again. But I forgive myself for accepting and allowing myself to parent from the example of my parents. Isn't
That
that
is,
such a powerful statement?
oh my gosh, that like That actually gives me chills.
Mm, good, good. And what that allows you to do, and I know it sounds really simple, but what that allows you to do is kind of just take a step back for a moment, right? Release yourself from the emotions that may be welling up within you at that very moment. And then you can start practicing that self-realization. Take note of, okay, well, what is the emotion that I'm feeling? And if you can, and again, this may not be practical in the very moment, but later on, write down for yourself, like, okay, I was feeling anxiety, I was feeling anger. And why were you feeling that anger? Well, because I felt like my child was disrespectful or they weren't listening to me, or, actually explain it to yourself
Hmm.
what it is, why this is a valid emotion for you to feel, or why you have told yourself it's a valid emotion for you to feel. And then, if you can, try to think of it from the perspective of how your parents would have responded in this situation to you doing that, because it gives you an idea of what you're expecting, what's the norm for you, right? And then the final piece to that, and how you can really start to make a big shift, this is the really practical piece, is write out for yourself how you would prefer to respond, or how you would have
Mm.
preferred your parents respond in that situation. If you were the child and your parents were happened upon you doing this, how would you prefer that they respond to you? And once you've got that, and why would you prefer that? And once you've got that, then the next time a situation comes up, try to implement that response, right? And this does wonders for the relationship between you and your child, because it's giving yourself the understanding of, okay, I don't have to be my parent. I don't have to be my parents. That's huge, right?
It is.
And then from there, you can actually start seeing, okay, well, what are the changes I want to make? And why is this a good thing for me to do, or not a good thing for me to do? And and then you can start building that understanding with your child versus just commanding them, versus just trying to get them to obey.
Mm. That is so practical and amazing. Like, so Drake, I actually have one more question for
Yeah.
you that is taken from my audience, because a lot of a lot of us have a whole lot of anxiety, and are still trying to face and get practical solutions with all of that. And one of those questions is, how do I deal with anxiety and strange people enough that if I take my son to the zoo, I don't have to sit and just be isolated for 2 weeks to recover.
Mm.
So, how to start actually being able to go in public places and feel like that anxiety is not going to get so overwhelming. It requires a 2 week recovery.
Okay. So this is really helpful when, well, first off, if you've never been to the zoo before, and this is your first outing in the last month, I'm not going to suggest you go to the zoo.
Well, even the supermarket, I'm sure, requires some of us. It takes a while for us to literally recover from social interactions.
Yeah. So there's a few things that I would suggest. I'll give like kind of an easy thing to do, but then there's way more in depth that you can go with this, right? The easy thing to do is sort of like what we just did for that situation with our kids, but we're having the
Hmm.
patience with ourselves, right? And so what that looks like is you start thinking of going to the supermarket or going to the zoo, or you're going to create a live video. Man, I remember,
Mm,
when we were talking earlier, you said, I'm really comfortable going live now, right? But I remember
absolutely.
the first time I went live, I was like shaking, holding the phone. And then somebody I knew popped up, and I'm like, oh, they're watching me.
Right? And then you're just like, okay, gotta
Right,
go.
right,
Yeah.
right, right, right. But what's what's really practical here is becoming aware of what are the thoughts that come up. They're going to think I'm stupid, or people are going to look at me, or it's not safe, or whatever the thought may be. And write out those thoughts really clearly for yourself and try to figure out, if you can, where is that thought coming from? Why are you having that particular thought? Why is it not safe? Because so many things can happen at a supermarket. We'll have things happen before at a supermarket, or have things happen before when you were in a crowd. And maybe there's a memory there. Maybe there's like a really core memory there. And generally speaking, there is, right? And sometimes we
Yeah.
can remember it, and sometimes we can't, because we were so young, we don't really remember the particulars, but somehow that moment got stuck in us, right? And if you can remember that memory, good. Then now you look at that memory, and I'll give an example from my own personal life. Um, I had this moment where I was trying to talk to someone. They said something that I disagreed with, but I had such anxiety around disagreeing with someone
Mm.
that I just said, yeah. And I was kicking myself later going, why did I agree with them? Like, I don't agree with that at all. Like, I felt like, what's wrong with me? And then I started looking at that situation and going, oh, you know what? I had this moment where I remembered that when I was a child, the adults around me, whenever I would say, you're wrong, like, as children sometimes do, no, you're wrong. That doesn't make sense. And I probably didn't say it very nicely. Kids they haven't really learned the tone and the pitch yet, right?
No.
I was one of those kids. And so I was told that you're talking back. You can't talk back. And if
Hmm.
you continue doing that, you'll get in trouble. And my response to that was,
Hmm.
I'm not talking back. That doesn't make sense. And I kept doing it until I got in trouble. And I did that enough times where I said, you know what? When somebody says something that I disagree with, I'm just going to agree with it. It's a lot easier. I don't get in as much trouble. It doesn't hurt as much, you know?
Mm.
And when
Hmm.
I realized that, then I also realized, oh, you know what? I'm not that little kid anymore. I'm not 4 or 5 years old anymore. These people are not the same adults that were around me when I was that age. And I don't think that they're going to give me a spanking or put me in timeout, And and then the next part was realizing the logic behind it, and then going, okay, now I have to challenge myself to put myself in that situation slowly, not like just jumping in and like, you're wrong, but slowly with people that I trusted, going, um, well, I disagree. And then realizing, oh, there was no spanking. There was no punishment. Okay, all right, cool. And then developing that after a bit of time, right? So that's the easy version, if you can believe it or not. For the harder version, we'll have a longer conversation another time.
Absolutely. I completely believe it. So, Drake, if anyone wants to learn more about education and the process and what you're doing specifically, uh, where can they reach you?
Yeah, sure. So if anybody liked what they heard here, and they said, that was great, but okay, now how can I help my child even more? Or how can I help myself even more? Then what I'm doing is a 15-minute consult for anybody from your group, right? And it'll be me personally. You can go onto my website. It's unlocked.com and /calendar. So if you do unlock ed, so unlock like you're unlocking a door, but in the past tense, unlocked, FL like for life.com/calendar. You can book like one of those 15-minute slots. And if you write in the notes there that you came from Angela's group, the parenting myself group, the breaking cycles, right? If you let me know there, I will personally take the call. It is no charge for any of you. Even if you can't make it, like whatever time slots are available, if you just book the call this week, I will be sure to honor that. You can just say, hey, I booked a call, but I can't do that time. Can we reschedule? We'll do that. And yeah, I'd be happy to chat with any of you and help your child so that they can live really their best life.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much for coming on with us, and you've given so much value. I
Thank
hope
you.
that
Thank you,
everyone loves
Angela.
it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to collaborating a lot more with you.
Me too. Me.